Step out of the vehicle now.
Officer, I provided my license and registration. What is the reason for this stop?
I said step out. Don't argue with me.
I'm not resisting. I'm asking a lawful question.
Sir, diablo no like it. Hands on the hood. Do it now.
I do not consent to any searches. So, King is, I need to get to my appointment.
You don't decide that.
The blue lights flashed at exactly 2:17 p.m. on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. This traffic stop would destroy a cop's career, send him to prison for 12 years, and result in a $5 million civil rights verdict that made Texas history. Judge Patricia Morgan had spent 14 years on the federal bench in Houston. She was respected, accomplished, and had never received a single traffic violation. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe, because this case will absolutely blow your mind. Judge Patricia Morgan had spent 14 years on the federal bench in Houston. At 48 years old, she had presided over thousands of cases ranging from corporate fraud to violent crimes. She drove a modest sedan, lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and had never received so much as a speeding ticket in her entire adult life. That Tuesday afternoon, she was wearing her usual professional attire under her judicial robe, which she had removed after court ended for lunch break. Nothing about her driving was erratic or suspicious. She was traveling 5 miles under the speed limit, using her turn signals properly, and following every traffic law to the letter. But none of that would matter to Officer Coleman. Morgan was a single mother raising 2 children. Her daughter was preparing for college entrance exams the following week. She had built her career through decades of hard work, late nights studying case law, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Her accomplishments should have commanded respect. Instead, they would become the very reason she was targeted. Success and achievement don't protect you from bias. Sometimes they make you a bigger target. Officer Derek Coleman had been with the Houston Police Department for 9 years. On paper, he looked like a decent cop with commendations for service and positive performance reviews from his supervisors. But what those supervisors didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that Coleman had developed a troubling pattern. He seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting successful Black professionals. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, people who had achieved more than he ever would. Coleman had been passed over for promotion 3 times in the past 4 years. Each rejection had deepened his resentment. He blamed affirmative action diversity quotas, people getting advantages he believed they didn't deserve. When Coleman spotted Judge Morgan driving through downtown Houston that afternoon, something triggered his predatory instincts. Her confident posture behind the wheel, her professional appearance, the way she carried herself with quiet authority. All of it reminded him of everything he resented. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would teach her a lesson about respect. Unchecked bias combined with the power of a badge creates a dangerous equation. Coleman was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The traffic stop began with immediate red flags. Coleman approached Judge Morgan's driver's side window with his hand resting on his weapon. The aggressive posture was unnecessary for a routine traffic stop, and Morgan recognized it immediately. Coleman demanded her license and registration without explaining why he had pulled her over. This was the first violation of proper procedure. Officers are required to state the reason for a traffic stop. Coleman didn't care about procedure. Judge Morgan calmly provided both documents while asking what violations she had committed. Coleman ignored her question completely and walked back to his patrol car, leaving her sitting there. For the next 20 minutes, Coleman ran her information through every database he could access. He was searching desperately for anything. Outstanding warrants, unpaid tickets, a suspended license, any excuse that would give him leverage over this woman who clearly thought she was better than him. But Judge Morgan's record was spotless. Her license was current, her registration was valid, her insurance was up to date. No warrants, no unpaid fines, no violations of any kind. Nothing. Coleman's frustration grew with each clean result. He wasn't ready to admit defeat. When he returned to her vehicle, his entire demeanor had changed. The professional facade was gone, replaced by barely contained aggression. He was going to escalate this situation whether he had legal grounds or not. When officers can't find a reason for their actions, they sometimes create one. Judge Morgan was about to experience this reality firsthand. Coleman ordered Judge Morgan to step out of the vehicle. She asked why, calmly requesting clarification for what violation had prompted this escalation. Coleman raised his voice and repeated his command louder this time. The professional tone was completely gone. Judge Morgan complied, but she also did something that would prove crucial later. As she opened her door, she activated the voice recorder on her phone, which was still sitting in her car's cup holder. Everything that happened next would be captured in crystal clear audio. When your rights are being violated, evidence is your most powerful weapon. Not arguments, not explanations, not trying to reason with someone who has already decided you're guilty. Evidence. Coleman ordered her to place her hands on the hood of her car. Judge Morgan asked again what traffic violation had prompted this stop. Shut up and do what you're told. His language had deteriorated from unprofessional to openly hostile. This wasn't law enforcement anymore. This was something else entirely, something darker. Judge Morgan remained silent and complied with his commands. But inside her legal mind was cataloging every violation, every illegal action, every word that revealed Coleman's true motivations. The recorder captured it all. Then Coleman made his first major mistake. He began searching Judge Morgan's purse without her consent and without a warrant. This was a clear Fourth Amendment violation. Coleman had no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, and no legal authority to conduct this search. Judge Morgan stated clearly and firmly, "I do not consent to any searches." She followed up immediately. "I want to see a warrant." Coleman laughed. The sound was dismissive, almost mocking. "I don't need your permission or a warrant." In Coleman's mind, his badge gave him absolute power. He believed he could do whatever he wanted, and this woman would simply have to accept it. He was wrong on every count. As he rifled through her belongings, Coleman found her judicial identification card. Most officers would have immediately realized their catastrophic mistake and begun apologizing profusely. Not Coleman. His mindset was already locked. This woman had challenged his authority. She had questioned him. She needed to pay for that disrespect, Judge, or not. Coleman pulled out the ID and examined it. Instead of recognizing his error, he made another decision that would seal his fate. Stating your rights clearly creates a legal record even when those rights are being ignored. Judge Morgan's calm, clear objections were being recorded. Every refusal Coleman made was documented. Every illegal action was building the case against him. She wasn't fighting, she was building evidence. There's a difference that Coleman would soon understand. Coleman accused Judge Morgan of carrying a fake ID and impersonating a federal judge. The accusation was absurd, but Coleman was committed to his narrative now. Judge Morgan remained calm. "I am a sitting federal judge. You can contact the courthouse to verify my identity." Her response revealed Coleman's true character. He said something that it would be played in courtrooms and quoted in legal journals for years to come. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States, you're going to learn some respect." That single statement exposed everything. His motivations, his biases, his belief that he had the right to teach successful Black women lessons about respect. It wasn't about law enforcement. It was about power and racial resentment. Judge Morgan went silent. She didn't argue or plead. She simply cataloged every violation in her eidetic memory. The time, the location, his exact words, his actions. She thought about her daughter preparing for college entrance exams. This moment would become a lesson not just for her family, but for an entire system. Staying calm doesn't mean accepting injustice. It means building a stronger case. Coleman was digging his own grave with every word, and Judge Morgan was documenting every shovelful. Coleman handcuffed Judge Morgan and placed her in the back of his patrol car. This was the third major violation. He had no probable cause for an arrest. Judge Morgan had committed no traffic violations, no crimes, nothing that would legally justify detaining her. She asked to speak with his supervisor. Coleman's response was immediate. "Shut your mouth." Intarded. The patrol car, Judge Morgan's mind worked methodically. Each violation was another point in the lawsuit she was already planning. Every illegal action Coleman took was adding zeros to the damages he would eventually owe. Physical resistance in these situations is dangerous and rarely effective. Documentation is what wins cases. Evidence is what changes systems. As Coleman drove toward the county jail, Judge Morgan memorized every detail. The timestamp on the dashboard clock, the route he took, the exact words he had used. Her photographic memory was building an ironclad case. Coleman, meanwhile, sat in the driver's seat feeling satisfied. He believed he had taught this arrogant woman a lesson she wouldn't forget. He thought his badge and his authority had prevailed. The irony was almost painful. Coleman wasn't teaching a lesson. He was creating evidence for his own destruction. Every decision he made, every procedure he violated, every right he trampled was being documented and remembered. He had no idea he was driving toward the end of his career. Coleman transported Judge Morgan to the county jail where the booking process began. He told the intake officers that she was a career criminal who had been impersonating a federal judge. He suggested they process her for identity theft and fraud charges, in addition to the traffic violations he had fabricated. The intake officers were actually competent at their jobs. They had processed enough real criminals to recognize when something didn't add up. Judge Morgan's demeanor, her speech patterns, her detailed knowledge of legal procedures, everything about her suggested she was exactly who she claimed to be. One of the intake officers noticed the discrepancy immediately. Real criminals don't speak like this. They don't carry themselves with this kind of quiet confidence. They don't reference specific legal statutes from memory. While Coleman was busy filling out paperwork, one intake officer quietly stepped away and called the federal courthouse. Coleman had no idea what was happening behind his back. 30 minutes later, the courthouse confirmed what Judge Morgan had been saying all along. Judge Patricia Morgan was indeed a sitting federal judge. She was expected back in court that afternoon for a sentencing hearing. The jail supervisor, a veteran officer with 25 years of experience, immediately understood the magnitude of what had just happened. A federal judge had been illegally arrested and brought to their facility. He picked up the phone and called Sergeant Harrison Coleman's direct supervisor. The walls were beginning to close in. Sergeant Harrison arrived at the jail within 15 minutes. Coleman confidently explained that he had arrested someone impersonating a federal judge. He expected praise for catching such a serious criminal. Harrison listened, his face growing paler with each word Coleman spoke. Then he asked the question that would expose everything. Did you verify her identity with the courthouse before making the arrest? Coleman answered without hesitation. Didn't need to. The ID was clearly fake. That was violation number 4. Proper procedure required verification before arresting someone claiming to be a federal official. Coleman had skipped that step entirely. Harrison pulled Coleman aside away from the other officers. She is a real judge, Judge Patricia Morgan, sitting federal judge. Coleman's face went blank. Shock, then immediate defensiveness. No remorse, just self-preservation. She wasn't cooperating. She was driving suspiciously. Harrison knew the dash cam footage would prove otherwise. He had seen enough of these situations to know what was coming. Judge Morgan was released immediately with a formal apology. Harrison tried to contain the situation, instructing Coleman to write a report following proper procedure. But it was already too late. The damage was done, and there was no way to undo it. Judge Morgan returned to the courthouse, postponed her afternoon hearing, and met with an attorney that same evening. She filed a civil lawsuit and submitted a formal complaint to the FBI. When a federal judge's civil rights are violated, it falls under federal jurisdiction. The FBI collected the audio recording from her phone and obtained the dash cam footage from Coleman's patrol car. What they found was damning. The dash cam proved Judge Morgan had been driving safely, following all traffic laws. Coleman had fabricated every justification for the stop. He had lied about everything. But the FBI investigation uncovered something even more disturbing. They began examining Coleman's arrest records and complaint history. A pattern emerged that made their blood run cold. 47 victims. Every single one was black. Every single one was successful. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, professors. Coleman had been systematically targeting accomplished black professionals for years. The modus operandi was identical across cases: fabricated traffic violations, aggressive illegal searches, public humiliation. Then came the most damning discovery. Sergeant Harrison had known. 12 formal complaints had been filed against Coleman. Harrison had investigated each one and buried them all. Police Chief Davidson had known too. 3 different community groups had warned him about Coleman's pattern. Davidson had ignored every warning. The rot was systemic. Judge Morgan filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Coleman Harrison and Chief Davidson. The charges included false arrest, illegal search and seizure, civil rights violations, and emotional distress. The trial was devastating for the defendants. The audio recording was played publicly. The dashcam footage was shown to the jury. Every illegal action was documented and undeniable. Coleman took the stand and tried to defend his actions. He contradicted himself repeatedly. He couldn't explain why he never verified her identity. He couldn't justify the illegal search. Then the prosecutor played the audio. "I don't care if you were the President of the United States." That single quote exposed his true motivations to everyone in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Their verdict, $5 million, $2 million in punitive damages, $2 million for emotional distress, $1 million for civil rights violations. Coleman collapsed in his chair. His attorney had to physically support him. One moment of ego had just cost him everything. That's the price of racism with a badge. But the civil verdict was only the beginning. Federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against Coleman Harrison and Chief Davidson under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The criminal trial was swift and decisive. Coleman received 12 years in federal prison. Harrison received 8 years for enabling Coleman's behavior and covering up complaints. Chief Davidson received 12 years for systematic failure to address known civil rights violations. The sentencing hearing was brutal. The judge read the terms while Coleman sat trembling at the defense table. His attorney had to physically support him. "You will be 62 years old when released, Officer Coleman. Your life as you knew it is over." His pension was forfeited. Restitution was ordered to all victims. The 47 other victims who came forward after Judge Morgan's case received a collective $42 million settlement from the city. This wasn't just about one bad cop anymore. This was about system accountability. The message was clear: everyone who enables civil rights violations will face consequences. Justice had spoken with finality. The entire Houston Police Department was placed under federal oversight through a consent decree that would last at least 10 years. Every policy training program and disciplinary procedure would require federal approval. The police academy was completely restructured. Bias training and constitutional policing became mandatory for all officers, new and veteran alike. A community oversight board was established with real enforcement power, not just advisory capacity. The impact spread nationwide. The FBI opened 6 additional investigations in other cities, uncovering similar patterns of abuse. Judge Morgan testified before Congress, helping to draft legislation that strengthened civil rights protections. Law schools began teaching Morgan v. Coleman as a landmark case in civil rights law. From his federal prison cell, Coleman watched news coverage of his former department's transformation. Everything had changed because of one decision he made at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Systemic change is possible when accountability is enforced. Coleman lost everything. 12 years in prison, his family, his reputation, his future. One racist moment created lifetime consequences. Judge Morgan won $5 million, became a reform icon, and changed laws nationwide. The lesson is clear: You don't win by screaming, you win with evidence and proper procedure. In the smartphone era with federal oversight, racism carries a price some cannot afford to pay. Justice was served, but rebuilding trust continues daily.